Hi there, I'm Bernard Keane. Welcome to another edition of Crikey's Crossing the Floor. Now, today I want to talk about just how bad the media can be when it comes to covering politics. This weekend has seen a new peak, or should that be nadir, in the hysterical pursuit of Peter Garrett, who, according to the opposition, should be in the dock for the deaths of 4 insulation installers, or at the very least should be losing his ministry. The fact that the 4 deaths, tragic as they are entirely unrelated to anything that Garrett actually did. All he was guilty of was approving the rollout of funding for an entirely voluntary home insulation program, is beside the point. The 4 deaths give the media a really good hook on which to hang a story of political and bureaucratic incompetence. A far clearer example of bungling incompetence, the Green Loan debacle, has gone begging for coverage for the lack of such an emotive draw, while the media has luridly suggested that Garrett has somehow got blood on his hands. As an aside, one of the incessant complaints about the government stimulus package has been that it hasn't really been spent on proper productive investment. That is, instead of spending money on, say, new ports that we could send out our coal exports through, we've been wasting it on building better facilities for educating our kids. Never mind that a key characteristic of all those expensive private schools to which people in wealthy electorates send their kids is really, really high quality school infrastructure. You'd think a program that kept relatively low skilled people employed, the first sort of people to get laid off during an economic downturn, and which yielded long-term benefits to households in terms of reduced energy expenditure and long-term environmental benefits to the country in terms of reduced greenhouse emissions, would actually be a worthwhile investment. Well, not so, according to Queensland Liberal Party hack, national retailer head and noted clown, Scott Driscoll. That's his Facebook page there, where he says that his favourite book is the Daily Newspaper. Driscoll called the insulation scheme extreme green politics. Cop that, Kevin Rudd, you enviro-Nazi. The other reason that the media love the insulation story, of course, is that it involves Peter Garrett. Peter Garrett's a favoured media target. In fact, there may as well be a big red target painted on that skull of his. The political media love to get stuck into Garrett because, well, look, rock stars just shouldn't become politicians. It doesn't matter that he had a long stint running an NGO or that he's been in politics since the 1980s. Fact is, he shouldn't be in politics and therefore he must be a bungler and he must have sold out his principles. Better still, you can attack Garrett from any direction. Conservatives don't like Garrett because he's a raving environmentalist. The unions don't like Garrett because he's not one of them. And the Greens don't like Garrett because he should have joined them, but he joined the Labor Party instead. Garrett's like the gift that is perfect for any occasion. Now, the contrast was, as Kevin Rudd would say, stark between the attention lavished on Garrett and the amount of media coverage that a couple of other issues got this week that, from some points of view, might be considered equally important or maybe even a little bit more important. In the roughly 2 weeks since the opposition released its direct action climate policy, it's been savagely attacked from all directions, not just by the government, of course, who predictably attacked it, nor just from green groups, who obviously were going to savage it as well. No, the attacks have come from other directions, including from an economist hired last year to actually assist the coalition in its response to the ETS. That's David Pearce from the Centre of International Economics. Attacks have also come from Malcolm Turnbull, who spent about half of his Crossing the Floor speech last week detailing how unworkable the policy was and how inconsistent with Liberal principles the policy was. From experts in the emerging area of soil carbon, on which the coalition very heavily relies, who are saying that the coalition basically have got their figures wrong by a couple of orders of magnitude. And from an international energy investment and analysis firm, which hooked into the policy in a big way last week. Of course, you wouldn't have known much about that from the mainstream media, which seems to be content with the narrative that Tony Abbott's got a climate change policy, whether that policy actually makes any sense or not. And then there's the mysterious case of a deafening silence that greeted the announcement of a $500,000 handover of taxpayers' money to the free-to-air television networks, which was announced last Sunday afternoon, behold the timing, by Stephen Conroy. The announcement of this sleazy deal received polite, downright non-committal press coverage. Even The Australian, which frequently resorts to just making stuff up in order to attack the government, said nothing. It was only after where Crikey began pointing out just what an outrageous rort this was that there was any sort of follow-up. and paltry follow-up at that. At least today, the Sunday Telegraph finally did a story on it, having found a suitable, though irrelevant, hook on which to hang the story. Although from the headline it's hard to tell whether Stephen Conroy gave Kerry Stokes a massive handout or was having an affair with him. Governments handing out hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars to a powerful industry, most of whom are foreign and don't even pay tax here, would under normal circumstances be a media frenzy. But because it's the media itself involved, there's this peculiar silence, and not just from the media but from the opposition as well. The reason is because most voters pay very, very little attention to politics, and in fact their only exposure to politics on a regular basis is in the 30 seconds to 1 minute political reports that they see on the evening news. So that 60 seconds is the most important political battleground in the country, and it's one that both sides are desperate to shape. And the first rule of that process is, don't offend the networks. Now, admittedly, the travails of Peter Garrett and all that blood he allegedly has on his hands is a much easier story to tell than grubby media deals with or without skiing in Colorado, or the collapse of a party's climate policy. I'm not saying anything new when I point out that it's the media's pack mentality and their preference for the obvious and the straightforward over the boring and the complex that has dominated its priorities and story selection over the last week. But it's also a question of narratives, what fits the stories that the media thinks are important, and how they choose the stories that they don't think that you need to know about. Bear that in mind as the pursuit of Garrett continues. What the media doesn't tell you is at least as important as what it does, and frequently more so. Crikey.